I used to think the city would be my forever home. The noise, the pace, the constant movement. It was everything I thought I wanted. Then something happened, something I still don't like to talk about. All I'll say is that it left me with a rare case of phonophobia. That constant buzz you feel when your leg falls asleep. Imagine that, but in your chest, every time you hear a sudden sound. Car horns, slammed doors, even footsteps in the hall. All of it made my heart race like I was being hunted. And eventually, I realized I couldn't live like that anymore. I needed silence. 3 years ago, I found it, or so I thought. It was a cabin deep in the Oregon wilderness. I won't say where exactly for reasons. That'll become obvious. But it was tucked so far into the trees that even the nearest dirt road was a 20-minute walk away. No traffic, no neighbors nearby, and almost no cell signal. The listing had been straightforward. Small, rustic cabin, wood heat, secluded location. It was exactly what I wanted. When I first stepped inside, the air smelled of pine sap and old books. The walls were thick, the beams solid, and the stone fireplace looked like it could survive another 100 winters. For the first time in months, I felt my shoulders drop. For the first week, I barely left my little clearing. I'd wake up to birdsong instead of sirens, fall asleep to the wind brushing through the trees instead of drunken arguments. In the alley outside my old apartment, every night it felt like the world pressed pause, just for me. The nearest neighbor was about a 10-minute walk away, down a narrow trail that snaked through the woods, but I didn't bother visiting, honestly. I wasn't looking to socialize. That changed on my 7th day there. It started with a knock on my front door. The cabin didn't have a doorbell, so the sound was strange in itself. When I opened it, an older woman stood there, holding a wicker basket. She looked like she'd stepped straight out of an old-fashioned postcard. Long silver hair falling past her shoulders, sharp blue eyes that didn't blink much. She smiled, but it was the kind of smile that didn't quite reach the eyes. "Welcome to the woods," she said. "I'm Marlin. I live down the trail." She pushed the basket toward me before I could answer. Inside were jars of preserves, sealed and labeled in tidy handwriting. I took it awkwardly, thanked her, and that's when she said something that made my skin prickle. "Keep your lamps full, your windows locked tight, and your mind sharper than your axe." It sounded rehearsed, like she'd been waiting to say it before I could ask what she meant. She gave me a curt nod and walked back down the trail, disappearing into the trees. That night, a thunderstorm rolled in. Rare for Oregon, but not unheard of. I lit candles, curled up on the couch, and let the steady roar of rain on the roof lull me into a rare calm. For once, the sounds didn't scare me. In fact, they soothed me, at least until the pounding started. It wasn't the polite knock from earlier. This was violent, a heavy, deliberate banging that rattled the frame. Heart in eyes. My throat, I grabbed a flashlight and peered through the narrow window beside the door. It was Marlene. Her hair was plastered to her face, her clothes soaked through. She clutched a flashlight in one hand like a lifeline. When I opened the door, she didn't wait for me to speak. I saw someone near your woodpile, she said, eyes darting past me toward the darkness beyond my porch. Rain hammered down so hard, it blurred the tree line. I swept my flashlight over the clearing, but saw nothing. Are you sure? I asked. She nodded, still scanning the shadows. Then, without another word, she turned and walked back toward her trail. I stood in the doorway, watching the weak glow of her flashlight bob between the trees until it vanished. Then something hit me. There was no way she could have seen my woodpile from her cabin, not in daylight, and definitely not in the middle of a storm. The only way she could have known was if she'd already been on my property. That thought sat heavy in my mind as I double-locked the door and checked every window. The storm dragged on for hours, but eventually I started to drift in and out of uneasy sleep. Somewhere past midnight, a sharp crack woke me. Not thunder. Wood, like a branch snapping under weight. I slipped out of bed, heart pounding, and inched toward the window. There she was. Marlene stood at the edge of the trees, her body angled away, hair hanging in wet tangles. The moonlight lit her face just enough for me to see she wasn't smiling. She wasn't moving at all. When she shifted, just slightly, I ducked below the sill, afraid she'd see me watching. When I finally looked again, she was gone. I didn't sleep after that. I sat in the living room, clutching my flashlight, waiting for dawn. Then, at maybe 3 a.m., there was another knock. Not pounding this time. Soft, slow. I crept to the door, keeping to the side so whoever was outside couldn't see me. One glance through the glass froze me in place. It wasn't Marlene. A huge bearded man stood there. His clothes were soaked, his face unreadable. He wasn't shivering. He wasn't smiling. He just waited. I backed away silently, locked myself in the bathroom, and called the police. While I whispered to the dispatcher, the knocking turned into slamming. Wood cracked, hinges groaned. Then, with a sound like a gunshot, the front door gave way. Glass shattered, furniture splintered. Heavy footsteps thudded across the floor, but they never came down the hallway toward me. And then silence. The police arrived quickly, but the man was gone. They swept the property half-heartedly and found nothing. I insisted we check Marlene's cabin. When we reached it, my stomach dropped. It was abandoned. Not like she'd just left. Like no one had lived there in years. The windows were coated in dust and cobwebs. The porch sagged. Inside, there, was nothing but an empty fireplace and warped floorboards. The officers told me no one had been there for decades. I moved out the next morning. Some friends think Marlene was a ghost, trying to warn me. I don't believe in ghosts. What I believe is that two people, her and that man, had been squatting in that cabin for a long time, and for reasons I'll never understand. One of them decided to protect me, and the other wanted me gone. I'll never know which was which. Adrian Keller had always liked the quiet, born and raised in the sleepy town of Driftwood, Wisconsin. He was used to winter nights when the world seemed to hold its breath, a kind of silence where snow muffled everything, and the only sound was the steady hum of tires on frozen asphalt. At Christmas Eve, he and his girlfriend, Lila Marin, were halfway through their third year of a simple tradition. Spend the evening with his family, exchange gifts, and then drive to her place so they could wake up Christmas morning together. It was a tradition Adrian loved, an excuse for long talks on the road, and a way to avoid Lila's chaotic house on the actual holiday morning. This year, though the snow had come harder than usual, his mother had tried to convince them to stay the night. But Lila was insistent. "We'll be fine," she'd said, her gloved fingers lacing through his as they stepped outside. The roads were nearly empty. No headlights behind them, no taillights ahead. Just 2 hours of quiet driving through frozen farmland. That was when the first call came. The phone buzzed in the cup holder, its screen lighting the dim car interior. Adrian glanced at it. Unknown number. He ignored it. 2 minutes later, it rang again and again. By the fifth time, he sighed and swiped to answer. "Hello?" A low, steady male voice spoke, each word deliberate. "Adrian Keller, 23 years old, lives on Riverbend Road, works part-time at Halverson's garage. Black Honda Civic, cracked windshield, passenger side." Adrian's grip tightened on the wheel. "Who is this?" A small chuckle. "Don't worry, I'm not here for you." Something in the man's tone felt wrong, as if he were smiling. "I'm here for the girl." Adrian's gaze shot to Lila. Her head snapped toward the phone, her eyes wide. "What? Girl?" he demanded. "The one sitting right beside you?" Lila's hands shot out, snatching the phone from his hand. She didn't speak, didn't argue, just hit the red button to end the call. "What the hell was that?" Adrian asked, heart pounding. Lila's breathing was shallow. "Just drive." "No, Lila, you don't get to tell me some creep knows my name and where I live, and then—" "Adrian, please," her voice cracked. "Just keep driving." The desperation in her tone stopped him cold. For the next 20 minutes, neither of them spoke. Adrian tried calling the number back once, but it went straight to a disconnected message. Eventually, he turned the radio back on, just to fill the silence. They reached her house close to 1 a.m. The snow had piled thick in the driveway, and the wind howled against the eaves. Adrian didn't want to leave her like this, but Lila wouldn't. "Invite him inside. I'll call you in the morning," she promised, forcing a small smile before slipping through her front door. Adrian sat in his idling car for a moment, staring at the faint light in her upstairs window. Something about the way she moved quick, almost furtive, unsettled him. The first night, he woke to find a missed call from the same unknown number. Timestamp, 2:14 a.m. The second night, 2 missed calls, both at 2:14 a.m. On the third night, he answered. "You shouldn't have let her go home," the man said. Adrian sat upright in bed. "Who are you?" "Doesn't matter." "What do you want from her?" Silence then. "Sometimes people don't tell you what they've done. Sometimes you only find out when I come knocking." The line went dead. Adrian didn't sleep after that. The next day, he drove to Lila's house. Her car was in the driveway, but she didn't answer the door. When he called, her phone went to voicemail. By evening, worry had curdled into something heavier. At 9:30 p.m., she finally texted, "Don't come over. Tonight, please. It's safer if you don't." Safer from who? He replied. No response that night. Adrian parked his car 2 blocks away from her house and walked the rest of the way, his breath fogging in the freezing air. From across the street, he saw her bedroom light glowing. For a while, nothing happened. Then, the light went out. A minute later, a figure appeared at the end of the street, a tall man in a dark coat. Moving slowly toward the house, he stopped halfway, looked directly toward Adrian's hiding spot, and raised his phone to his ear. Adrian's own phone buzzed. Unknown number. He didn't answer. The man waited, tilting his head as if listening for a sound, then turned and walked into the woods behind Lila's street. The next morning, Adrian confronted her. She finally let him in, but her hands shook as she poured coffee. "You're not safe," she said. "From him?" She nodded. "He's someone I knew before you, someone I thought I got away from. Why didn't you tell me?" "Because if you knew, he'd use you to get to me. That's what he does. He finds people. He learns everything about them, and he calls right before." She cut herself off. Right before what? Her eyes were wet. Right before he takes them. Adrian wanted to believe this was paranoia, that it was some stalker who could be reported and arrested. But that night, the calls came again, 2:14 a.m. on the dot. The voice was almost cheerful. "You can't keep her forever, Adrian. She always comes back to me." He hung up, blocked the number, and tossed the phone onto his nightstand. But an hour later, the phone rang again. Different number this time. The caller whispered his address. Then the sound of snow crunching under boots. Then a knock, faint but unmistakable, at his front door. When Adrian flung the door open, no one was there. Just footprints in the snow, leading away toward the street and stopping halfway, as if the person had vanished into thin air. The next day, Lila's house stood empty. No car, no furniture, like she had never lived there at all. Her phone was disconnected, her social media wiped clean. The police took his statement, but offered little hope. "She probably skipped town," the officer said. "Happens more than you'd think." Adrian didn't tell them about the calls, or the man in the street, or the way the voice always seemed to know what he was thinking. It's been 3 weeks now. Every night, 2:14 a.m., the phone rings. Adrian doesn't answer anymore. But last night, the voice left a message. It's your turn to take the drive. Night driving had always been my thing. Some drivers hate the graveyard shift, the long stretches of silence, the way the streets feel hollow, the fact that every shadow looks like it's hiding something. Me? I liked it. Fewer drunks than you'd. Think more peaceful roads, and better tips from the night owls. I'd been at it for 3 years, and in that time, I'd learned how to read people the second they stepped into my car. A slouched walk meant exhaustion. A fake smile usually meant a rough night, and the ones who kept their heads down, 9 times out of 10, they didn't want conversation. But on this particular Tuesday night, I met someone who didn't fit into any of those boxes. It was a little after 1 a.m. I'd just dropped off a fare near the east side, was sipping the last bit of my convenience store coffee, and debating whether to call it a night when a ride request came through. Pickup location: a 24-hour gas station on the outskirts of town. I figured it would be someone finishing a late shift, or maybe a stranded traveler. Either way, easy money. When I turned into the lot, the first thing I noticed was how empty it was. No cars at the pumps, no one inside at the counter. The store lights were still on, buzzing faintly, but the glass door was locked. Then I saw him. He was leaning against the side of the building near the ice freezer, standing just out of reach of the bright security light, tall and rail-thin, shoulders hunched, wearing a heavy brown coat that looked like it had seen more winters than I had. The kind of coat that's so worn in, it's more part of a person than clothing. No phone in hand, no backpack, not even a plastic bag, just standing there, still. As stone, I slowed, checking the address on my phone again. The pin was right on top of him. The second I pulled up, he stepped forward, and before I could even roll down the window to confirm his name, he yanked open the back passenger door and slid inside. "Hey," I said, forcing a polite tone. "How's your night going?" He didn't answer, just gave a slow smile in the rearview mirror, the kind that doesn't quite reach the eyes, and said, "Drive." Something about the way he said it made the hairs on my arms stand on end. The app showed a short route, about 10 minutes, taking us down the main road toward a cluster of older neighborhoods. I started driving, trying to shake the unease. A few minutes in, I tried again. "So, heading home from work?" He shifted forward a little, eyes locked on mine in the mirror. "It's never work," he said softly. "It's something else." Before I could ask what that meant, he reached forward and switched off the radio. My playlist had been on low, barely audible, but now the silence in the car felt heavy. We passed under a row of flickering streetlights. He kept watching me, and I could feel it, like his gaze was a physical weight pressing against the back of my neck. Halfway to the destination, he said, "Take the shortcut." I glanced at the GPS. There's no shortcut on the map." "There is," he said, "behind the factories." I knew the road he meant, a narrow, badly lit strip that cut between a row of abandoned warehouses. I'd avoided it for years. Too many blind corners. Too many places for someone to hide. "I think I'll stick to. Take it." This time his tone left no room for discussion. Against my better judgment, I turned. The road was as bad as I remembered. No working streetlights, just the weak sweep of my headlights across cracked asphalt and rusting fences. Somewhere in the distance, metal clanged. Maybe from the wind, maybe from something else. He leaned forward again, his breath faintly visible in the cold air. "Ever wonder," he said, "what kind of people get into your car?" I tried to laugh it off. "I've seen it all. Trust me." He tilted his head. "Not yet." As we rounded a bend, I spotted the faint outline of a police cruiser parked at the far end of the road. No lights on, just sitting there in the dark. The moment my passenger saw it, he sank low in the seat, so low that I could barely see the top of his head in the mirror. We passed the cruiser slowly. The officer inside didn't look our way. My passenger didn't move until we were well past. Then he sat up again, smiling that same thin smile. "Almost there," he murmured. The pin on the app led to a dead end. Street lined with boarded-up duplexes. Half the street lamps were busted, the other half barely working. He told me to stop in front of one with plywood covering every window. Before getting out, he leaned forward, resting both hands on the back of my seat. His nails were cracked, dirt under each one. "You drive well," he said. "Maybe I'll see you again." Then he slipped out and walked toward the darkened building. I sat there for a full minute, watching his silhouette disappear into the shadows. Before I finally drove off, 2 days later, scrolling through the local news, I froze. There was an article about an armed robbery at, you guessed it, that same gas station. The suspect, described as tall, thin, wearing a heavy brown coat. The footage was grainy, but I didn't need it to be clear. I knew now. I don't care how good the fare looks or how close I am to my quota. If my instincts say no, I cancel. Some rides aren't worth the money. Some rides you don't want to finish.